Let's get to Tim Walz, who, just when you think no one's sitting at this table, neither she nor the big white blanket, can embarrass themselves any further, he does. She asks him, to her credit, about the carrying the weapons in war, which we know is a lie. He never served in war. He's been stealing valor for quite some time. And take a listen to this answer.
Say, hey, when there's a problem, you call a man. The Democrats can't even tell you what a man is.
So when you hear Walz brag about how much of a man he is, what does that tell you?
I think there might be a little bit of a cope there, you could say. There's a little bit, he has to remind us how masculine he is, trying to not even be able to load a shotgun or fix a truck.
Tim Walz thought he could coast on soft speeches and photo ops. But Megyn Kelly and Charlie Kirk brought the political sledgehammers. In a brutal takedown, they exposed every flaw in his leadership, from failing schools and rising crime to hollow policies masked as progress. This wasn't just sharp criticism. It was a full-blown demolition. They pulled back the curtain on a governor more focused on headlines than real results. The show is over truth, just stole the spotlight.
You said that you carried weapons in war, but you have never deployed actually in a war zone. A campaign official said that you misspoke. Did you?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly proud. I've done 24 years of wearing the uniform of this country. Equally proud of my service in a public school classroom, whether it's Congress or the governor. My record speaks for itself, but I think people are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeves, and I speak especially passionately about our children being shot in schools.
I'll tell you one thing. The most masculine thing that someone can do in America today is stand up for women that are not able to stand up for themselves.
Right.
So while Tim Walz is going on Gavin Newsom's podcast, attacking me, by the way, saying that I'm a bad guy, well, I'm sorry, Governor Walz. One thing that we don't have in common is, unlike you in Minnesota, I, every single day, am actually fighting for female privacy in locker rooms and that women's sports will not have men in them. Real men stand up for women when they're not able to stand up for themselves.
Megyn Kelly and Charlie Kirk don't wait for permission or check if the coast is clear. When they see nonsense posing as leadership, they don't stay quiet or whisper behind closed doors. They go public, cameras rolling and facts flying. Governor Tim Walz, they brought enough firepower to turn his carefully crafted narrative into a blazing bonfire. It wasn't personal. It was about calling out incompetence so loud it practically begged for a microphone. And Kelly and Kirk never miss when truth needs a voice.
And the idea that you said that you were in war.
Yeah.
Did you misspeak, as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar is not always correct. But again, if it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on my dog.
This is a sacred trust. In the spring of 2005, Walz walked away from that sacred trust, abandoning his post when he learned of an upcoming Iraq deployment. This is cynical Pubula saying this. He is a coward. According to this Twitter feed, he is a quitter. And every veteran I've talked to thinks that Walz is close to betraying the country by doing it.
Megyn Kelly took one look at the political packaging around Tim Walz and knew something was off. He wore the everyman label like a costume, parading as a folksy governor who understood the struggles of the average Minnesotan. But Megyn has spent years tearing apart pretenders and polished narratives. She knew exactly what she was seeing. Walz's act didn't radiate authenticity. It screamed consultant-approved nonsense, wrapped in secondhand sincerity and staged charm.
What Walz did is the moral equivalent of a mother dropping off her 5 preteen children at an orphanage in the dead of night so that she could run for Congress. Yes, it is that bad. This was more than just abandoning troops. It also reflects a major personal deficit in his character and makeup. By the way, this is written by a veteran.
Megyn Kelly began peeling back Tim Walz's glossy political exterior by exposing the stark contradiction between his image and his actual leadership. He campaigned on unity and transparency, but governed with confusion and cowardice. Megyn zeroed in on his habit of deflecting blame, comparing him to a kid who spills milk and insists the cup committed treason. His leadership style, she argued, boiled down to 3 steps: announce a vague plan, dodge accountability, and hold a press conference that answered none of the real questions. Charlie Kirk, meanwhile, went straight for the economic jugular. torched Walz's fiscal policies, mocking their fragility as if they were written on flash paper. Charlie called out the governor's talent for driving businesses out of Minnesota faster than a snowstorm clears the streets. Taxes were up, regulations were chaotic, and economic growth had stalled. Walz, he said, confused prosperity with expanding government payrolls while punishing the private sector for daring to succeed. Together, Megyn and Charlie began to weave a broader critique. Megyn dissected Walz's pandemic mismanagement, arguing that he acted like a part-time epidemiologist with a full-time fear machine. Lockdowns hit hard but were selectively enforced based on political convenience. Small businesses were crushed, while large corporations remained untouched. Schools were shuttered while bars received capacity waivers. This wasn't science. She declared it was politics in a lab coat. Their takedown revealed a governor more concerned with optics than outcomes and a leadership style built on spin, not substance.
The idea that you said that you were in war.
Yeah.
Did you misspeak as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar is not always correct. But again, if it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on my...
Charlie Kirk added fuel to the fire with hard receipts, showing how Tim Walz shifted his messaging with the political winds. One week, Walz paraded selective data to support his narrative. The next, he buried it when it no longer served him. Hospital capacity numbers were inflated, projections frequently missed the mark, and policies seemed designed more for headlines than public safety. Charlie called it panic management, masquerading as governance, arguing that instead of preparing people, Walz frightened them, freezing like a deer in the political headlights. But it wasn't just the policies, it was also the performance. Megyn Kelly pointed out how Walz always showed up for photo ops at just the right moments during floods, protests, vaccinations, always with a rolled-up sleeve and a grim face, as if starring in a documentary titled The Burden of Leadership. Yet when consequences came, cities burned, children fell behind, and small businesses closed, Walz vanished like a ghost with a campaign team. Charlie didn't let the riots slide either. He pulled out the facts on how Walz mishandled the George Floyd protests that spiraled into riots. Cities descended into chaos, police were overwhelmed, and Walz delayed action, only calling in the National Guard once the damage was already done.
Tim Walz then lied about it to run for Congress and acted as if he was on the front lines. And people in Walz's battalion died. People under his supervision died. If Master Sergeant retired Walz could not be trusted to fulfill his duties he had to his soldiers, his unit, and his nation in 2005, how can he be trusted to be vice president in 2025?
Charlie Kirk mocked the idea that Tim Walz was simply waiting for more information during moments of crisis. To Charlie, it looked more like Walz was waiting for someone else to clean up the mess so he could swoop in and take credit. The hesitation, the stalling, the let-it-burn approach, all of it painted a picture of a man more afraid of political backlash than actual flames. Then came education. Megyn Kelly tore into Walz's record with the precision of someone who's seen the damage firsthand. Despite being a former teacher, Walz presided over one of the most dramatic drops in educational performance Minnesota had seen in years. Reading scores plummeted, math scores tanked, and instead of fixing it, Walz offered more virtual learning and fewer real solutions. It was a failure not just of policy, but of priorities. Then both Kelly and Kirk pivoted to cultural issues. Megyn highlighted how Walz tries to play both sides on every major social topic, becoming the political equivalent of lukewarm, soup-bland, unconvincing, and satisfying to no one. She called him out for enabling radical agendas while pretending to be the adult in the room. His idea of moderation, she argued, was simply hiding extremism behind a Minnesota accent.
What kind of bullshit is that? No, you don't, sir. We don't lie about military service we didn't actually perform, like going to war. We don't steal valor by saying that we had a higher rank in the National Guard than we did. We don't run around saying we served in operating Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan when we didn't. We don't stand and watch somebody say that we were in combat in Iraq when we weren't.
Charlie Kirk continued his takedown by focusing on Tim Walz's loyalty not to Minnesotans, but to the political machine. According to Charlie, Walz didn't lead the state. He followed the script handed to him by donors, party operatives, and the latest progressive trends. When the party said to mask kids, he did it. When they said to close churches but keep liquor stores open, he complied. When they claimed crime was just a myth, Walz nodded along like a bobblehead in a windstorm. Charlie's message was blunt. Walz wasn't a governor. He was a brand manager for the Democratic Party in snow boots, and they weren't done. Megyn Kelly pivoted to public safety, highlighting how law enforcement under Walz had been demoralized, defunded, and demonized. Police morale had cratered, crime was surging, and neighborhoods were left wondering why their leaders treated public safety like a political inconvenience. Backed by stats, officer resignation rates, and community testimony, Megyn connected the dots between softened crime rhetoric and hard-hitting consequences. She made it clear, Walz didn't just fail to stop the chaos, he enabled the very charade that led to it. Together, their takedown wasn't emotional or partisan, precise and relentless. They hit every pillar: leadership, economy, education, public safety, and culture. They didn't need to shout or perform. That's what made it more brutal. It wasn't loud, it was lethal. Not a rant, but a reckoning. A clean, surgical exposure of a governor whose narrative collapsed under the weight of unfiltered truth.
Podcast attacking me, by the way, saying that I'm a bad guy. Well, I'm sorry, Governor Walz. One thing that we don't have in common is, unlike you in Minnesota, I every single day am actually fighting for female privacy in locker rooms, and that women's sports will not have men in them. Real men.
They stripped away the talking points, dismantled the excuses, and mocked the half-baked narratives. What remained was a clear portrait of a man who talked big, acted small, and governed like he was always waiting for someone else to make the first move, and it wasn't over. Megyn Kelly left the door wide open, promising to keep the spotlight fixed on leadership that fails the very people it claims to serve. Charlie Kirk vowed to keep exposing the numbers, contradictions, and political gymnastics that masquerade as governance. Because the truth is, Tim Walz might keep smiling through press conferences, but the curtain has been pulled back. Then they turned their attention to Walz's climate agenda, polished piece of political theater that looked great on paper but fell apart under scrutiny. Megyn pointed out how Walz spoke about green energy, like he was auditioning for a solar panel commercial, but the reality in Minnesota told a different story. Roads were crumbling, residents were freezing in winter due to failing energy grids and poor planning. It was all optics, no headlines with zero follow-through. Once again, the pattern emerged: performance over results, image over impact.
Yourself from that clarification. And then here's two pieces of this that are really, I speak like they do. People are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeves, and I speak especially passionately about, and then he goes on to blame it on the school shootings. I guess he was upset about school shootings, so he lied. But stop saying you speak like we do. I speak like regular people.
Charlie zoomed in on the budget, breaking it down like a frustrated math teacher watching students fail simple equations. The numbers were clear: Minnesota was raking in taxpayer money, yet somehow always came up short when it was time to fix real problems. He called it reverse alchemy, turning gold into potholes. Charlie mocked the state's obsession with raising taxes in the name of progress, while actual progress was missing everywhere but in photo ops and campaign flyers. Megyn then turned to healthcare, another key promise from Tim Walz that collapsed under bureaucratic weight. Despite bold reform pledges, wait times increased, rural hospitals declined, and the only thing that grew was the number of committees endlessly working on solutions. Promises were made, but results never followed.
All out continues for Tim Walz on the disastrous performance he delivered, in particular when it comes to his self-described knuckle-headed behavior, which was just his latest in a series of lies. The reason he resorted to, I'm a knucklehead, was he got confronted with his latest lie that's been unearthed. There's a long list of them. This one was that he was in China when the Tiananmen Square disaster unfolded, when hundreds of people were killed. You know, whether you were in a place where hundreds of people are being massacred by their government.
Megyn said it was the only healthcare strategy in America that seemed to make people sicker just by watching it unfold. Doctors were frustrated, patients were stuck waiting, and the entire system resembled a hamster wheel more than a functioning network. Charlie then turned to immigration, spotlighting Walz's vague stancelways wrapped in soft language, never backed by clear policy. From sanctuary city gestures to symbolic declarations, Walz embraced an open-door approach that ignored the real strain on already overwhelmed communities. Charlie emphasized the growing disconnect between what politicians in St. Paul were pushing and what everyday Minnesotans were living through. The gap wasn't just visible, it was widening fast. And Walz, he said, was building a bridge of promises that led absolutely nowhere.
Again, if it's not this, it's an attack on my children for showing love for me, or it's an attack on my dog.
This took chutzpah. Let's go through it. You said you carried weapons in war, but you've never deployed in a war zone. A campaign official of yours said you misspoke. Did you? Well, I'm proud, incredibly proud of my record. He keeps doing this. Equally proud of my service in the classroom. Did I mention I was teacher and a coach, an assistant coach? Okay, whatever. But he's more stolen valor. In the classroom, I'm in the classroom. My record speaks for itself. It doesn't, actually. You've put a lot of lies into that record that you've been called out on by service personnel.
Megyn said it was the only healthcare strategy in America that seemed to make people sicker just by watching it unfold. Doctors were frustrated, patients were stuck waiting, and the entire system resembled a hamster wheel more than a functioning network. Then they revisited Walz's media strategy, and Megyn tore it apart. She criticized the carefully curated interviews, the puff pieces, and his refusal to face tough questions unless the cameras were friendly and the script pre-approved. Megyn, no stranger to polished politicians hiding behind press teams, said Walz had turned it into an art form. She joked that his idea of transparency was letting reporters watch him read a statement written by 6 people he'd never met. Charlie chimed in, comparing Walz's media appearances to college group projects. He'd show up at the end, read the final paragraph, and expect full credit. Meanwhile, real damage piled up behind the scenes. Teachers burned out, business owners gave up, and public trust eroded.
Disgusting, repulsive, and reprehensible examples of abandoning one's unit, of turning back on country and instead for own personal comfort and safety that we have ever seen in politics. And it's far worse than I even think people are describing it. It is worse than stolen valor. It is abandoning your fellow soldier.
Parents began pulling their kids out of public schools. And what did Tim Walz do? He held a roundtable with like-minded individuals and called it progress. Megyn Kelly concluded by hammering the culture of complacency that had taken root under Walz. Mediocrity became policy. Failure was rebranded as transition. And every crisis was followed by a carefully worded press release blaming the system. Instead of the leadership, Megyn made it clear this wasn't just political disagreement. It was about a governor who consistently failed to show up when it mattered most. Charlie agreed, because in the end, it wasn't about red or blue, it was about results. And under Tim Walz, results had been replaced by excuses, optimism by spin, and leadership buried beneath layers of scripted empathy and hollow applause.